everyone, and welcome to the very first edition of this new Amagate Radio Communications program. My name is Kolu Omonera. Welcome you very warmly, very happily, very delightedly on this beautiful Tuesday, Monday, July 14, 2025, to the first program of the quarter on Arc. How have you been? It's been a refreshing 2-week break for us, and we're back and better. For quarter 3, we'll be starting off this Monday with my program titled Translating Strategy into Performance Management with Technology. I repeat, Translating Strategy into Performance Management with Technology. Thank you very much for keeping the date with us. Thank you very much for, joining us. Thank you so much for your feedback. Thank you for believing in us. Thank you for being here with us every day of this past week, some past months, some past quarters, and past couple of years, right? So today we are going to be looking at a quick introduction, so to say, to the new quarters program. The program, again, remember, is Translating Strategy into Performance Management with Technology. So essentially, when we talk about organizational strategy, is something that we have dealt with on ACT before. I think we have looked a little bit at execution before. But one thing we are doing in this particular program is showing the connection between strategy and performance management and the role of technology as an enabler. I repeat, one thing we are doing in this program is showing the connection between strategy and performance management, the critical connection, I dare say, right? Because when you talk about strategy, you are articulating a destination, but that doesn't mean that the map is the location, right? The map just kind of shows you how you can arrive at the location, but performance management is like the vehicle that guarantees arrival at the destination. I repeat, strategy is like articulating a map or drawing a map, or having a map that shows you how to arrive at the destination, right? Even to pick your destination, right? So the map shows you a range of options, especially if you're like a tourist and you're trying to explore the environment. But with strategy, you can begin to sort of define what should be that destination. Now, don't get me wrong, some people don't even need the map to have an idea of where they're going. Like, I'm going to Africa. If I'm in America, I'm within Africa, I'm probably going to Nigeria. I'm in Nigeria, I'm probably going to Lagos, and so on and so forth. So some people don't essentially need the map to give them an idea of the destination, but the map is still not the destination, right? And for those who do need the map, like strategy also helps them to begin to articulate possible destinations or identify possible destinations, but all of it still does not translate into arriving at the location. Very critical. So performance management is like the vehicle that now carries you, whether it's a plane or a ship or a car or some other kind of vehicle, even a drone to this world, right? Or a space shuttle, depending on where you're going. Now, the performance management is like the vehicle that facilitates your arrival at the location. You can articulate the destination from now till till his kingdom comes. You can articulate the location from now till forever, right? But you are not likely to get to that location, to arrive at that location as an organization or as an institution without the vehicle of performance management. And that is the critical execution enabler that we are connecting with strategy on this program. So like I said, a very warm welcome first and foremost to you on this first edition of the first program for this quarter on ARC. We are very glad to welcome you back to ARC. Hope you've taken your time to reflect on your half year and to set fresh goals for your half year 2 and of course quarter 3. Right now, while we're doing all of that, we want to share our deepest condolences with Nigerians home and abroad on the passing of the former head of state of Nigeria, the former president of Nigeria, General Muhammadu Buhari, like some will call him, or President Muhammadu Buhari, like some will also call him. Our deepest condolences to Nigerians on the passing of President Muhammadu Buhari. May God rest his soul and grant comfort to all his loved ones. Now, as we continue in today's introductory session, we're trying to, establish the reason why we now need technology. Now, you know already that strategy is, helps to articulate where the organization is going, to define where the organization is going, to probably streamline possible options, in terms of where the organization is going. Strategy also helps to define how the organization can arrive at its destination, because there are a couple of options, right? When you hear the word strategy in itself, it's about saying, okay, what are the possible ways? If I'm strategizing, sometimes I've already defined my destination, I'm trying to, articulate, I'm trying to identify, I'm trying to weigh the pros and cons of different options, right? So we talk about strategic options. My strategic option for arriving in Africa, for instance, from America, from the United States, in the very, very far olden days, would probably include a ship, right? And then probably as the decades and the centuries, grew and blossomed and unwound, maybe you will now talk about the planes. Today, talk about the private jets more, frequently than previously. And of course, you also talk about drones. There are some things that maybe you can even activate drones to deliver in Africa without you leaving the comfort of Iowa in the United States. So there are strategic options, and you also begin to weigh your pros and cons. Now, something is very critical here. When you're talking about your strategic options as an organization, I remember this is still an introductory session. When you're talking about your strategic options, you must learn to do that vis-a-vis your peculiar circumstances. I repeat, when you're weighing, when you're evaluating, when you're assessing, when you're comparing the ups and downs, the pros and cons, the benefits and demerits of your strategic options as an organization, as an institution, it's important for you to do that vis-a-vis the peculiarities of your organizational and institution context, right? Very important, because sometimes, and this is why strategy is always very important, you need to define where you're going before you even begin to consider the ups and downs of the strategic options. Because sometimes you're going to look at that and say, well, cost is of primary importance to us in this phase as an organization. It's very important for us to watch our costs. It's very important for us to attain cost efficiency. Within that circumstance, cost becomes a critical factor, a critical evaluation factor in weighing your strategic options. At other times, market penetration is your singular goal, and at that point, cost becomes relative, because you want to weigh the cost of saving some money immediately with the cost, or compare that with the cost of failing to penetrate the market, and what the greater impact will be in the mid to long term, right? So again, before you begin to weigh your strategic options, before you even begin to define the criteria by which you will assess your strategic options, it's very important for you to define your priorities. It's very important to know where you're going, where you are as an organization, the stage of evolution you have gotten to, and all of this play a critical role in helping you to assess your strategic options and ultimately determine your strategic priorities. Very, very, very important. This is still Tolomada at Ambogate Radio Communications, warmly welcoming you to the very first edition of Translating Strategy into Performance Management with Technology. Now, we've looked at the first part of it, which is strategy. When I said look, of course, this is just an introductory session. We've not taken the deep dive at all. This is just like showing you a quick map overlay, right? A quick lay of the land, just a quick sense of what the next 3 months would be like, what the rest of quarter 3 would be like, Monday to Monday, by God's grace. So when you have that map sort of laid out, right? You know where you're going, you know what are your priorities at this particular phase of your organizational existence, where you are in your institutional evolution, you know what you're trying to achieve, you know what the priorities are. Very, very importantly, you must then try to create a performance management framework. Remember, this is just a quick summary. There's so much that you still need to consider in articulating your strategy. But let's go to performance management for the sake of time, and we'll see if we can quickly talk on technology before we round off this introductory session for today. So coming to performance management, like we said, is a system, is a process, that enables execution, that ensures you arrive at the location you have defined, that you have articulated, that you have laid down. Very, very, very importantly, to get there, you will need performance management. Now, what is performance management, and why do we need to translate strategy into performance management? Now, performance management is a process through which, to begin with, is a process through which everyone takes ownership of their portion of the strategy. I'll say that again. Performance management is, broadly speaking, a process through which everyone takes ownership of their portion of the strategy. And let me explain that. So remember, typically when you're doing the strategy, you're doing it at the organizational level. In fact, sometimes at the group level, sometimes at the national level. Right? What's a national strategy for developing innovation systems, for instance? Is a strategy to capitalize on human talent? Is a strategy to import talent? Is a strategy to co-create, and so on and so forth. So strategy, broadly speaking, is usually at the whole sum level, right? Is at the broader level, is at the more comprehensive level. At the minimum, we are talking about an organizational strategy typically. Now, the fact that you have an organizational strategy does not mean that it's going to get implemented, like I was alluding to earlier. And many times, part of the reason why organizational strategies, and by the way, we've been studying this since 2008, almost from the beginning of Amogate, bridging the strategy performance gap has been our passion. It has been our deliberate intent, and it has been our relentless pursuit. So trust me when I say we have a basis to share some of the things that we are sharing on this particular program. So usually, often, right, many times, the challenge is that when organizational strategies are made whole, are made comprehensive as they should be, if one is not careful, the strength becomes the weakness. I'll explain what I mean by that. Part of the strength of an effective organizational strategy is that it is all inclusive. In other words, an organizational strategy must take cognizance of the different aspects of the organization's intent and eventually prioritize. Very, very, very important. However, in becoming as wholesome, as comprehensive as possible, the flip side, the danger, right, the downside is that everybody's job could end up becoming nobody's job. I've had many times when we would approach an organization and someone at the top is trying to birth change, right? And someone very close to the person at the top, at a level very close to the person at the top, would say, look at that shelf, and they will say to us as consultants, look at that shelf, and we'll look at the shelf. Say, the last consultant that tried to help us with our organizational strategy, their efforts ended up on the shelf. And we'll look at them in response. I remember this day like yesterday, and we'll say, no, you don't know us. We are different by God's grace, because we are going to ensure that the organizational strategy gets translated into performance plans, and those performance plans are owned by different roles. And ultimately, even though there is organizational inclusivity, we would also ensure individual accountability. I repeat, ultimately, we would ensure that even though there is organizational inclusivity and the overall strategy includes every role and every aspect of the organization's going concerns, we will also still ensure that that wholesome, comprehensive, strategic plan is still cascaded, like they say in performance management, is still broken down into different roles such that there is individual accountability. The end of the story, this particular story, which is a true story by the way, is that it was this uncooperative top level person in the leadership position that was actually asked to exit that particular organization. Now, why I'm saying this is because so many times in our experience, when there is that failure to connect strategy with performance management, like the person said that day, this was over 12 years ago, But the person said that day, if organizations are not careful, and I'm talking about private sector organizations as well as public sector institutions, even non-profit organizations, if they are not careful, what actually happens is that the strategy ends up on the shelf, like the person was saying, or just a portion of the strategy. And when I'm talking about portion, I'm talking about a negligible portion, not a significant portion. Just a negligible portion of the strategy actually makes it to the point of implementation because of this gap between organizational strategizing and performance management planning. Very, very, very important. So I just hope that we've been able to get a sense of the criticality of performance management to execution. Very, very, very important. Organizational strategy is very important. It's very critical. It's the head. The process of strategizing. Where are we going? What are we trying to do? What are our critical drivers? What are our critical decision factors? Those lay the foundation. All of that thinking lays the foundation for execution. There is no point executing if you have not defined your strategy. You may end up spending 10 years doing what you could have spent 10 hours for, right? When you have clarity of strategy, you gain speed. You gain efficiency. Number one, you will not be pursuing the wrong things. You will not be working in a manner that is, not in consonance, right? Not in alignment with your vision. Very, very important. It's all before you even press the execution button, before you even try to go the performance management way, you must first establish strategic accuracy. And that's why this program is not titled Translating Performance Management into Strategy, but translating strategy into performance management. Very, very important, right? It is a strategic direction of the organization that must be cascaded into performance management plans and objectives for different roles, must be cascaded all the way from the topmost level in the organization to the lowest rung of the ladder. Very, very important. Now let's touch very quickly on technology, and then we'll begin to wrap up for this introductory session before we come back. Let me say something quickly as we go to technology. Remember, this is translating strategy into performance management with technology. I just said that the strategic planning process, how the organizational strategy should drive performance management and not the other way around, right? Just like we always say that strategy drives the structure, not the other way around. And once the structure is no longer serving the strategy, the structure should be reviewed. There may be a need for organizational restructuring and so on and so forth. Everything begins with a strategy. But let me also say, while preparing for this program today, I came across a research article which was interesting. You can check it out if you want to. This was talking about integrating strategic planning and performance management, and was looking at a multiple case study analysis. This was done in Italy, and this was done in 2022, by the way. What was interesting about this article was that this article, this is a research article, by the way, so there was evidence gathered from different case studies, the multiple case study analysis, like I said. So they were saying that, look, yes, strategy should drive performance management, but performance management can also inform the reshaping of strategy. And I agree, I don't disagree with that, right? Because every true performance management process should incorporate an element of feedback. Very, very important, right? And that's why we talk about reviews at the beginning of this episode. I just said I hope you've done your half-year reviews. It's always important, right? In the course of trying to implement, in the course of trying to share performance goals from the organizational strategy, when you come to your quarterly or half-year reviews or annual reviews, or even end of strategic period review, like a 3-year review, it's important for you to say what worked, what didn't work, what could we have done better, what are the lessons learned, what were the common challenges, what were the recurring issues. So don't get me wrong, it doesn't mean that you cannot take some lessons from performance management and use those lessons to reshape the strategic planning process. You can, like that article in Italy was saying, very true. But ultimately, to begin with, it is strategy that drives performance management, even though the performance management process can still take some lessons back to the strategic planning framework. This is still Tolu Omodara on Amoge Radio Communications on this maiden edition of Translating Strategy into Performance Management with Technology. We've looked at the criticality and foundational nature of strategy. We just reinforced it. We've also looked at the crucial aspect that performance management also plays, especially in implementation. What is the point of having a map when you never take the journey? After all, you're not going to live on a map. You're not going to live on the paper or even on the screen that is a map. You have to actually get on the road and arrive at the destination. And that is where performance management comes in. Performance management helps to ensure that we translate visions to reality. Performance management catalyzes that process of bridging the strategy performance gap, the strategy execution gap, which is our own passion. Bridging the strategy execution gap is our own passion at Amogate. So very important. But let's talk about technology, right? I said as far back as 2008 when Amogate started, we're very passionate about this, and we've remained committed to the process of understanding the hindrances that could get in the way of translating strategy into performance, of executing visions, of moving from visions to reality. A lot of organizations, way too many, right, actually get the point of execution. Some manage to articulate the strategy excellently, especially when they call on organizations like us, like Amogate, to help with the process. This is what we do. Please reach out to us. We can support you with your strategy articulation process. But beyond that, it's also important for us that you have an effective strategy implementation framework, and that is usually built on your performance management. If you do not have a sound performance management process and effective performance management framework, you are very likely to move from strategy into performance, from strategy into execution. Now, what is the role of technology in all of this? Well, I'll tell you very simply. About 30 years ago, I remember a form, at least in Nigeria, the form used to be called APA form. APA is Annual Performance Evaluation Review, and it was basically written. I also remember even about 21 years ago, right, even in the multinational in Nigeria where I used to work, I remember the process through which our performance evaluation was done, right? Yes, you would type some things into your laptop. I was using a laptop back then, 21 years ago, but generally it wasn't that widespread. Many people were using a desktop, and they didn't have apps, they didn't have softwares like we do now, so it wasn't essentially technology enabled. Now let's fast forward to 2025. I dare say that in 2025 a whole lot has changed significantly, even from about 21 years ago. Now you have technology that can enable strategy articulation, you have technology that can enable strategy implementation, technology that can enable performance planning, technology that can enable performance coaching, even coaching to identify the areas where either the individual is weakest, or a unit is not very strong, or a department needs to be grown, or an organization as a whole needs to be strengthened. Usually you have a lot of analytics helping with this. I've not even come to AI. I'm just talking about basic technology. I'm just talking about basic softwares. There's a whole lot of support, a whole lot of enabling that technology has brought to the fore. So right now, you do not just need to integrate your strategy with performance management. You do not just need to translate your strategy into performance management to enable execution. You also need to facilitate the translation of strategy into performance management with technology. Very well. You don't want to be behind. You don't want to left behind, right? Technology is not going to dictate your strategy, but technology is sure going to enable your strategy. Technology is not going to create your performance management framework, but technology is definitely going to give strategic speed to your performance management framework. And I'm using the word strategic speed again there because technology is not going to show you the way. No, you are going to know how you want to go, and that's the process of strategy, right? That's the process of strategizing that we're talking about earlier, the strategy articulation process. But once you know the way you want to go, technology can enable you arrive there faster. And when I say you, I'm sure you know by now that that's your organization, that's your institution, and that could even be an entire nation. Remember what I said at the beginning, that usually when you talk about strategy, you're looking at the bigger spread, right? Usually at the minimum an organization, maybe an institution, and maybe even an entire nation. Very, very important. So you have to ensure that you are deploying technology strategically to enable the translation of organizational strategy into performance management for the ease of execution. In fact, for guaranteeing execution, sometimes but also to facilitate execution, right? So you have to think about, okay, what do I want technology to do for me, right? What are the areas I need to speed up? Do I want analytics? Do I want to know where my people are weakest? Do I want to know at what time of the year we tend to fall behind on execution? Do I want to know whether there are some activities that are correlated with a decline in strategy execution? Do I want to even measure the comprehension of strategy? That's another challenge. Strategy communication is a challenge. Sometimes you also want to use technology to see how much of the strategic direction is comprehended by the rest of the people who are supposed to be doing the implementation. Sometimes there's such a huge communication gap between those who are articulating the strategy and those who are implementing the strategy that it's not difficult to understand why some strategies are dead on arrival. This is still Tolu Omodayo on Amoge Radio Communications, and this is the very first edition, the maiden edition of translating strategy into performance management with technology. Of course, let me say upfront here that Amoge actually has a technological solution where we have coded all of our knowledge of the last 20 years, and we've been working on it, and we are still working on it. We're working for about 2 decades on this, and we're translating our insights, our deep managerial and leadership insights in the area of strategy articulation and implementation into a software. And this is not the first time that we're talking about this software publicly. But beyond the software, when the time comes, we will share more about the software with you. But beyond the software, generally, every organization needs to translate strategy into performance management. Very, very important. And every organization in today's world has to find a way to enable this translation of strategy into performance management, to enable it with technology, to enable it through technology, right? That way, your chances of implementation will be significantly higher, and your speed of implementation will also be remarkably commendable. It's not enough for you to have a high chance of implementation. You also should ensure you are not moving any less speedily than necessary. A lot is changing in this dynamic world. You cannot be stuck on a particular strategy for forever. You must be doing your best to your speed to market should be one of your performance indicators, or should be the performance indicators of some of your senior executives in this day and age. Very, very important. The market is so complex and dynamic, and even the public sector environment is subjected to all kinds of dynamics and all kinds of instabilities and all kinds of complexities that you want to sometimes do certain things as soon as possible while there is a level of stability. So today we've looked at translating strategy into performance management with technology from a very broad point of view. We've tried to do a quick summary of strategy. Strategy is a whole program on its own, but please do well to check out our app page, Amoge Radio Communications, on YouTube. There's a lot that we have done in this area. I remember doing, I think, a whole quarter on strategy. So if that was just strategy, like I said. So if you want to learn about strategy, please check us out on YouTube, Amoge Radio Communications. We have about 275 videos on all kinds of programs on YouTube. One of these programs is the one I did, I think, about 2 years ago on strategy, developing organizational strategy. So that was focused on strategy and strategy alone. But in this particular case, we are not just looking at articulating strategy, we are also going beyond that to talk about how to ensure that the strategic, the plans that are made, the strategic direction that is set, is actually implemented. Because strategy articulation is one thing on its own, but another thing that is very, very important is also strategy implementation, strategy execution, and oftentimes is performance management process that guarantees that implementation. And lastly, of course, it is also critical to enable the implementation process with technology in this day and age. Technology brings speed, technology brings efficiency, technology helps the analytical insights, technology will enable you to understand what you need to do away with as fast as possible, where you need to optimize, what you probably need to tone down on, and so on and so forth, right? Technology is such a critical enabler that we cannot discuss translating strategy and performance management in this day and age without bringing in the role that technology can play in facilitating and accelerating this. So again, if you want to look at what we have done previously on just strategy articulation. This was a program I did about 9 months ago, about a year ago, on roadmap to organizational strategy. That was the title, roadmap to organizational strategy. I had at least 10 episodes on Amogate Radio Communication, and that was just looking at strategy. We looked at so many roles. Even during that program, I believe we looked at the role that IT plays, technology plays in facilitating strategy articulation. But this particular program goes beyond just the organizational strategy. This is about how to now ensure the implementation of organizational strategy using technology. Wow. I think this is where I'm going to draw a curtain on this maiden introductory session of translating organizational strategy into performance management with technology. I hope I've done a good job of introducing us to it on this maiden edition of the program, this episode of the program. We'll be back next week and we'll be going deeper. How do you connect your organizational strategy with technology, with performance management? What are the steps to take? And of course, we'll continue to speak to the role that technology plays in facilitating this. Remember, we'll be back same time, same station next week by the grace of God, and we'll begin to explore how to translate your organizational strategy. The how now. We've looked at the why today. Why should you translate your organizational strategy into performance management with technology? Well, next week we'll be looking at how, a little bit more of the how to translate your organizational strategy into performance management with technology. Thank you very much for doing this with us. Remember, my other colleagues will be here for the remaining 4 days of the week. We are back and better on Amogate Radio Communications. We'll be here from Monday through Friday at 12 noon Eastern Time and 5 p.m. West African Time on YouTube. Until then, you can follow us on Facebook, you can follow us on LinkedIn, you can follow us on Instagram, you can check out our website page, www.theamogate.org. And remember, you are the reason why we do this. We are very excitedly looking forward to partner with the organizations to articulate strategy, to implement strategy, to drive strategy implementation, and even its communication. This is our strength. These are our strengths, and we look forward to helping you build a very profitable and sustainable organization using the time-tested, proven principles of strategy articulation and implementation. I'll be back same time next week. Once again, think strategy, think performance management, and of course, also think technology. See you next week.